So I'm going to talk about two things we haven't talked a lot about today, land use and conservation. So my first chart is the global greenhouse gas emissions by economic sector. And we've got all the usual suspects here, electricity and heat production, transportation, industry. But look, 1/4 of the global emissions are coming from agriculture, forestry, and other land use. Now we're talking about emissions here. So we're talking about forestry, we're actually talking about deforestation. We're talking about emissions from humongous clearing of mostly tropical forests, some of our most important biodiverse areas in the world, and wiping out indigenous people's livelihoods, and there is nothing good about this. And it is enormous, and it is not part of many conversations. I'm going to get to why and maybe why that has to change. But remember last September, the peat and forest fires in Indonesia that blanketed that entire part of the world? In one single day in September, just virtually every day in September and into October, the emissions from one day's fires in Indonesia matched the entire U.S. greenhouse gas emissions on that day in the United States. The United States, by far, the largest greenhouse gas emitter. So there's that global deforestation piece of it. Now, hold that thought a minute. Because there's another part of the natural system that we don't talk a lot about, which is that when forests and landscapes are healthy, they drink in carbon. In fact, they can overcome emissions and are largely actually buffering now, having a harder and harder time doing it, but buffering now are aggressive over emissions globally. Now it's a cartoon, but you can get a little sense if you can see those numbers. Look on the right, the fossil fuels and cement production. This is global, compared to what's going on the left, which is the emissions from forests and soils and forest fires, et cetera. And then on the left side, the tremendous absorption of carbon and sequestration of carbon in soils and forests. Look at those numbers. They are huge. And in the middle to the right, you see in healthy forests, you get actually increased bonus points and more sequestration in not insubstantial amounts. This is obviously a cartoon, but it is in fact true. And here in the United States, for example, our forests, thankfully, have been relatively healthy lately, actually for some time. And in fact, our forests and our landscapes generally drink in and cover about 13% of our overall emissions. We are a sink. Now, there's concern that we may not be a sink if we do not continue to have healthy forests going ahead. But on the positive side of that, there's some really good news here if we have policies that recognize the potential enormous value of using our natural systems to absorb more carbon. We call that around here, Stanford, natural capital, because this can be just as significant in terms of capital, namely our natural landscapes, as investment capital in the latest techno-geeky thing is. But it requires continued investment. Now, the U.S. Geological Survey was asked from the 2007 energy bill that Jim was involved in to do a nationwide analysis of our land types and our overall sequestration capacity in the United States. And they spent, during my time at the Interior Department, about $40 million doing amazing work here. And they have characterized the absorptive capacity of our entire nation, every region. If you're having a hard time sleeping at night, just pull up one of these reports. I'll give you a couple of interesting points, though. They estimate that our public lands, and about 25% of the United States landmass are public lands, already store 11.6 billion metric tons of carbon, and that they project that with good stewardship, they could store another 2 billion tons, just our public lands. Just to give another little feel for how big an issue this can be, Tom Vilsack last February made an announcement on behalf of the USDA that he was going to introduce and has introduced a variety of voluntary programs for the ag community and for the forestry community that he believes, again, these are sort of voluntary, kind of low-price programs, everything from agricultural digesters to conserving threatened but very productive wetlands and forests. He predicts that by 2025, this will account for 2% of our U.S. emissions. Now, you move the needle, try to move the needle 2% of any of our emissions in sort of a technical sense, a non-nature sense, you're talking a lot of money. Here, it's a modest amount of money. There are other examples, too. Now, the other thing is there are some co-benefits here. Healthy forests, healthy landscapes not only drink in more carbon, but they also provide more resilience to climate change. You look at what's happening in the San Francisco Bay and the money that's going in to restore the wetlands that you fly over on your way into SFO. That's a wonderful hedge against sea rise and storm surge. We are finding that natural systems are some of the best ways to deal with sea rise and storm surge. When it comes to issues like the impact of drought on forests, the need for clean water from forests, if we have healthy systems, it's going to be more. Our forests are going to be more resilient. So why aren't we talking about this more? And why aren't we looking at the enormous gigaton opportunities on the climate change side? I think we need to, and I think our next president has a wonderful opportunity to do it. Why aren't we? Well, there aren't any good reasons why we're not, actually, but I'll posit a few. One is our government is not unified on this. EPA does their thing when it comes to evaluating carbon sinks. The Forest Service does their thing when it comes to carbon sinks. The United States Geological Survey, part of the Department of the Interior, with their $40 million, has done a completely separate thing. The reality is that we do not invest in some of the basics of how to characterize, define, and evaluate and monitor. This is hard. These natural systems are hard to do that on, but we are not really trying very hard. And the benefits potentially are huge. So what would I have the president do on this set of issues? First, I would say the president should celebrate, document, and disclose the key role that America's forests, parks, grasslands, and natural landscapes play in protecting the planet against carbon pollution. This is something we should all be proud of and know about it. And we should congratulate our forest owners, public and private, and our farmers and ranchers that are doing the right thing and having good soil management practices and keeping that carbon in the soil, and for the good work they're doing, and give them the tools to do more. You don't hear much about that today. We should be talking more about it. Number two, quantify the benefit. Force the experts together. Stop this stuff of three agencies taking three different methodologies. Force them to do a unified methodology for measurement and monitoring and get on with it. Third, encourage more investment and experimentation in enhancing carbon absorption in our landscapes. Make a market here. So Chevrolet, as part of General Motors, did an investment in the Prairie Pothole region last year to save some grasslands that were about to be converted and lost, and they got a big carbon credit for it, and lots of co-benefits. You're starting to see a market. And finally, join with the international community here and save the world's great forests. That emissions number has got to come down. That's mostly not here. And we all love forests. We know they're the Earth's lungs, astonishing biodiversity. In Paris, there was an underscoring of the importance of forestry and land use in the climate change world. In fact, for much of the developing world, their goals are all about land use and forestry. So let's get on with it, and let's create the market. While I'm on this subject, and I will move on quickly in a minute, I want to talk a little bit more about adaptation, because it's related here. And Kate mentioned it in the infrastructure context. There's a huge necessity that in the context of our natural resources, we also get our act together when it comes to adaptation. And this is going to be a challenge for the next president, because adaptation issues arise on a regional basis. They're about places. Not every place is Miami, where you're going to have water in the streets. But there is a Miami, and there are other communities like that. And one of the things the federal government has a big stake in this, as the largest water manager in the country, as the largest landowner in the country, as the wildlife manager for endangered species. So, hello again, federal agencies, stop acting like children and developing your own programs. We're going to do this in the right way together. And we'll all be better for it. The other piece of it, and there's a publication that came out today, I think it's available outside, that talked about 5 or actually 6 different climate change initiatives by the Obama administration, 1 by Jerry Brown. And it talked about the challenge that the natural resource agencies have had in coming together. It's an example of how not to do interagency work. The brighter side is that we have wonderful new technology to help with measurement and monitoring, namely the GIS mapping and data capability and mashing together that's available now. But again, our federal government, and that's how our federal government could probably help the most, the local folks in the region, not to supply the answer, but to supply the data, to have everyone understand what's going on and what can be done about it. Okay, I'm going to talk now about just a couple other things. This is a reminder, this chart, of the reality. You know, we've been talking a lot about renewable energy. It's only 10% of today's energy supply. We've been talking a lot about solar and wind. Look at that. It's 20% of 10%. We've still got a big issue with coal, natural gas, and petroleum. And there are some land use issues around them. Coal. 40% of the coal provided in the United States comes from the federal lands. You and I own that. We have a decision to make. Should we continue to provide that coal to the market at what has been pretty clearly very cheap prices? Should we, in fact, think about, as the landowner and as folks who are worried about this, about raising the price? And recognizing also that the prices do not include the real cost of coal, which includes those implications of the climate impacts that are not being captured by the market. Important questions for the next president. In the oil and gas space, methane. That's the big story. We haven't talked about it today. You all know how central it is. It is 16% of the global greenhouse gas emissions are methane, but you know that's at least 25% more powerful than carbon dioxide. So it's an outsized 16%. And as we have grown our economy with natural gas, we are finding methane everywhere. And we've got some of the best work in the country is going on right here with Rob Jackson and his finding of 6,000 methane leaks in Washington, D.C. I just want to know where they are. Boston, same thing. We've got the huge leak down in L.A., which by itself doubled the methane emission rate in the entire L.A. region. Now, so we've got things going there in terms of dealing with land use issues and how we do our oil and gas production, how we do our infrastructure distribution. The next president's got to deal with that too. I should also say parenthetically, the other land use side of methane is livestock and nitrous oxide fertilizers. And you saw that, remember that first slide, quarter of our world's emissions are from forestry and ag. We have to help farmers. They want to do the right thing. We have to find the way to have a market for digesters that works. We have technology, we can do it. Final thing is renewables, because there's a land use play here too. The thing about renewables that is amazing in some respect is and this is Tom Kiernan's slide from the Wind Energy Association, but because I respect Tom so much, I believe it. Look at the price has gone down, and look at the opportunities that have gone up. We have technology right now that is utility scale, ready to go. One of the barriers of it is getting it deployed. And we heard earlier about some of the techniques used to get it deployed in terms of incentives, et cetera, tax, et cetera. Well, one of the big issues is siting. It's really hard to site wind and solar projects. And some of that makes sense, some of it doesn't. And one of the reasons why some of the problems are there in terms of siting is because you have every unit of government, from the smallest to the largest, dealing with this new thing. And they're not very good at working together, at making, recognizing the business proposition, recognizing and sort of making the permitting system work. I will say on that paper that you will see, I hope you will read, there are some good examples of how that can be done. And in fact, I think the Obama administration in the first term and the Interior Department, in pushing through 16,000 megawatts of siting on public lands, did some of the things that we want the next president to do. But we need to do more. You've got transmission siting, you've got big footprint project siting, and you do have impacts. And that we got to make good decisions, but we need to do it efficiently and with a recognition that that we need to get to the merits of the question and not let the process hold us back. So I'll stop there, and we're going to do a couple of rounds of Q&A here. Thank you.